Bobbies and Kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. We are now on the second half of Ruth. I believe we're going to get to Ruth 3 and 4 today. Seem like relatively short chapters. Any opening comments on these?
There's going to be a very steamy scene coming up.
It's true.
One of the
It's
hottest
true.
scenes in the Bible, which is
Ah.
saying something.
Very sexy.
I would argue that Song of Songs is more steamy than
I said
Ruth.
this is one of. I said one of.
No.
But either way,
Yeah.
very,
Quibbling.
very
It goes on.
titillated to get to this.
Well, at least in this one, everyone has actually grown into their breasts, unlike Song of Solomon. Quick heads up at the start. I am only here for an hour. There's a thing, very, very important family thing stuff. Yeah, I will take care of, I have things to take care of, but I could not possibly allow that we should do this without any input from me, because as Lauren said, it is very steamy. And as the Unlucky Legume pointed out, I believe it was last week, this is a story used for purity culture in sermons, which is really fucking weird when you consider everything. Like, what in the no, this is not about how you should, not kiss until the altar. Very much no.
Right. Likewise, when we get through these two chapters, I have to run too because there's a Snake Appreciation Day.
Of course there is.
Of course.
Arn,
since you're running, there's a comment for you. People are asking you to run, actually.
Yeah, Aaron, run for Congress. I want to see you debate a Republican on TV. Sick of the civility of Dems versus Republicans, blunt and directness. I would be all for that too, but I ain't doing politics again. If there was a position on the Board of Education in my district, I might do that, but otherwise, no. So,
hey, speaking of hot and steamy, let me show you something I did for my wife that's relevant to Ruth.
Oh, Mark, calm down. And he's moving the camera down. Okay, hold up there, buddy.
All right.
So if you see this tattoo, the two rings right here, that's Ruth 1:16, the latter part that says, "For wherever you will go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will be there." And so that's a tattoo I did for my wife.
That's sweet.
Ain't
That's
you the
cute.
romantic?
As long as it's taken out of context, where the entire meaning of the entire meaning of losing your ethnicity is taken away.
Of course.
Well, and
everything's valid.
Okay, so who is reading today?
You know what? I always like reading smut. So let's
Yeah. Yeah, I assumed so.
Yeah. I'll gladly read all the worst parts. All right. So, chapter 3. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin. He said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then, as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, It must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Then he said, Bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. Then he went into the town. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, How did things go with you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, He gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. She replied, Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So, quite a few things there to briefly discuss. Of course, one of the biggest ones is I think some commentators are not of this opinion, but it is a minority view. The majority view here is that feet there is, of course, a euphemism. Now, why else would Boaz, or should I say, Bloaz, be so happy as to give her so much barley the next day? So yeah, it's supposed to be a euphemism there. And I think it's pretty clear. Although for context purposes, this threshing floor, essentially you take like the barley, and from what I could surmise, it's where you essentially kind of like just hit the barley on the ground until it all, I don't know, until all the seeds come out. I don't fucking know. All right, I don't deal with that shit. I'm not a gardener. All right.
Right. So
okay, so the barley, the 6 measures. Now I'm used to getting 6 measures of barley together, but usually it's in liquid form.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This would not have been in liquid form.
This is a large amount.
Well, like either way, like she's getting herself
not the barley.
She's getting herself all prettied up for this as well, to the point where he's like, "Who are you even?"
So I'm a little confused about these. I don't know, backwoods Arkansas traditions. That I will act as your next of kin.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. So I think the actual term, so it's translated as next of kin, but I think the actual term that's used is the one with the right to redeem.
Goel in Hebrew.
That what Tomer said. So there were multiple people with the right to redeem, which is very interesting, right? So there's like this hierarchy of people that could redeem. But that's why while Boaz is a redeemer here, he knows of another closer redeemer. So both father-in-law and both the father-in-law and the brother-in-law are dead. So it's not like the Genesis stories. This is somebody else that also has that right to redeem. So some kind of next of kin. But there's actually a connection here with like just land, with redeeming land in general, like not just the marriage and levirate marriage, but land too. So usually if someone has to sell land for money, a close relative would buy it so it remains kind of in the family. The same is being done here with both the family and the land. So the close kinsman, this close kinsman has the right to redeem both the land, like in the land custom just mentioned, but also is the one with that will inherit the right to have not only Mahlon's kid, but Elimelech's. You also have Elimelech's land. So remember in levirate marriage, the first child of that pair would be the dead brother's child. So both acts are being taken over in this book as if they were one practice. So like in Deuteronomy or in Genesis, we don't see this connection of levirate marriage with this practice of land redemption.
It does make sense, though, because if you're having a baby to essentially replace a person or to continue their line and their name, then yes, their inheritance, whatever their generational inheritance, should go with that, and that keeps things, keeps lines going. So you have, but then of course, the mother of the child has to be taken care of and all the rest of it. So you can see that it's a complex social interworking that does actually take care of widows to some degree, and try to, maintain the name and the memory of those who die, because life was harsh in the Bronze Age.
Lilith, the next time you speak, if you're using that fan, you have to begin your speech with, "I declare."
Well, I do declare, sir. Did you just tell a lady how to speak?
And something else, you may have already mentioned it, so forgive me if I'm repeating my y'all, but there's also the aspect of, like, we need a male to inherit the land or whatever is coming in within that lineage or family or tribe, and so that this redeemer duty within the families is also, I think, another way of preserving whatever it's in the family within the family, because Yahweh forbid that there's a widow that has money and land or whatever to her name, and she would marry someone else outside of the tribe, and now that's gone. So we're trying to keep things.
we can't let women have power. My God, they might start thinking, and then we're all fucked.
Got a comment from Stop Scamming Man, offers £10 and said, "Here are two channels giving excellent academic insights into Christianity and Islam, respectively. James Tabor and Exploring the Quran and the Bible." As long as they're not on this at the same time as us.
Just test it. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
I think my mic wasn't working for a bit before.
Yep. We can hear you. We were just ignoring you.
Maybe that's what it was.
Lying.
Yeah. Mark was right with what he was saying about the Redeemer mostly being about bringing like the property back with keeping it within the family. And I think the traditional commentaries say that Boaz was most probably a nephew of Elimelech, like the son of his brother, and this closer relative would have been probably just a brother. And his name isn't given, but some say that his name is.
Well, it's in chapter 4, and I have some commentaries on that.
Oh, great.
Well, I got one last question. How do we know this? Her laying at his feet and all that. How do we know that this is a euphemism?
Well,
why not read it literally?
So the thing is, very often it's used as a euphemism, but also think about it this way: if he turns over and sees her, that is not like if I'm laying like on one side and I turn over, like I'm not gonna see someone who is like just at my feet. I would see someone who is just sucking my dick, maybe, but not someone who is at my feet.
Well, depending which way you turn, you might bump
over.
into them in either instance, but you're definitely going to the second one.
At least in the English, it says he turned over. So
I'm hearing. That's giving me a different interpretation, because I mean, the Bible says many times about some lady coming in and washing their feet.
Yeah, I mean, there some instances
so those are
clear
anointing
that is referring to the feet, but other times it is sometimes taken to be a euphemism. However, I think Schipper has a more like nuanced approach to this, and when I'll get to
who's interested in that?
Yeah, I think
literally nobody.
Maybe it was Schipper or no, sorry, it was Nielsen. Nielsen was like, so I think she compared the usage of the word in Isaiah and the word for uncovering. So, some scholars believe that it can either mean Ruth is uncovering herself at his feet, or that it means, or that it just means generals there. Because women aren't ever seen uncovering men, meaning that like the word itself isn't used, but they do occasionally uncover themselves. So that was one interpretation. But I don't know. To me, with what happens before, with what happens afterwards, it kind of sounds like much more likely to be under the hypothesis of Boaz. So,
I mean, he says like, let's not do anything. Like he's like, stay the night, but I'm not going to marry you until
they already did
other. But I mean, I don't know. You could read into it.
But it's something that can't get her pregnant, or if she were not already married, had not been married, would not have compromised her virginity, because the hymen is the only thing that matters. My,
I don't think she would have been a virgin.
Well, no, she wasn't, because she was already married. But like, it's an activity that doesn't put lineage into. Because this whole thing is about lineage culturally. And yes, you could argue at the feet, you uncover the feet, he wakes up eventually and you're like, wrap me in your blanket. But it's definitely seductive. How sexual it actually got can be left to the imagination of the reader. I am just internally giggling about all the fucking times that I listened to ministers who were so full of shit talk about how this was about how they were so pure because, they had this exchange in the dark in the middle of the night and they never touched. It was so, I'm like, yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, no, it's that. Well, they were talking to a bunch of teenagers, and of course, the only thing that matters in Christianity is that teenagers don't fuck. But yeah, when they're trying to push like gold star purity culture, where you don't kiss till the altar, and this is the story they're going to, gotta say,
what I'm getting out of here is that it doesn't explicitly say so, but we're led to have the impression that she got anointed.
I think part of the thing is that in this culture, and perhaps not too far, the point here is that a woman has no business getting this close to a man, much less uncovering his feet, unless she were approaching him in a sexual way. I think that's kind of like what the point here.
Yeah. It's definitely it was definitely considered inappropriate or whatever. I do like the idea of it possibly meaning that she uncovered herself, because then like, oh, would you cover me with your cloak or whatever, kind of, take me under your wing,
please,
sort of makes sense
so
as well.
Cold, cover me. It has nothing to do with the fact that I've stripped off all my clothes and I'm laying here naked.
Don't. Not here.
Yeah, then he's like, and then it's also like, yeah, we're gonna get that Christian in the comment.
The guy was unhinged.
Oh no! Yeah. Which Christian is it this time?
Oh, okay. No, you didn't see it. Good. Okay, let's. Yeah.
Now I will say though that looking at the actual Hebrew, it does look like it has the ending for a third plural, third person singular. Is it not?
In the
on the Marulot, his feet.
Megilloth.
Megilloth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the word is odd because it only appears in Ruth in this chapter and also in Daniel 10:6. And yeah, I mean the word is composed of regel, which means feet, but I think usually most commentators take it to mean his feet, but again, it's a very odd word to describe his feet. Usually you do use you write raglav, so Megilloth is odd.
It's not entirely clear what she uncovered.
I have my commentary on this, but some see it as like the place of the feet instead of his actual feet, because it's an odd word to describe feet. Oh, and before I start my commentary, I should note that Theodoret of Cyrus, he he said that Ruth's marriage is free from voluptuous impulses. Yeah,
Yeah,
take it as you may.
I did want to say that you mentioned threshing floor and stuff like that could also be seen as a sexual innuendo in its own. Like threshing is the act of like you got your wheat and you want to get your kernels of grain out of it, separate it from the stalks or chaff.
Yeah.
So you smash it with something, and there's different methods, right? If you're doing it by hand.
So you're suggesting they smashed.
That's probably where the innuendo comes from. Threshing is like means
It's
it
like
means
some
to hit
ball
the wheat,
busting. Is
pretty
that what
much.
we're talking about?
Like if you were doing it on a larger scale back in those days, you would probably have you'd put the grain on the ground, and then you would have an ox pulling along like a plank of wood with like spikes coming out the bottom, and you would stand on the plank, and then the ox would pull you around in a circle, and then that would like kind of separate the grains and whatnot. But I think he probably was doing it by hand, which would have literally just been like taking bundles of wheat and smashing them against like a wooden post or something.
You could also use like a threshing stick. I think Gideon was doing that, like threshing, whacking.
You kernel, put it down, then you hit it. Yeah,
and then of course you have the tossing and
winnowing
to get rid of let the crusty shell,
because the stalk is lighter than the seeds. If you throw it up in the air, then the seeds will fall straight down, and
normally there might have been some whacking in that gel that you're talking about, but that's when he didn't have company.
Yeah, with company now they're grinding. It's the grinding stone is another one.
Yeah, grinding is also
and threshing about.
That's where it comes from. Separating the the word, something from the chaff, separating the
next thing you know they'll be soaking.
A good thing.
Okay, Matt White has a comment. Says Lawrence, again, this is leveret, as in according to the law of the Levites, not leveret as in a baby hair. Yes? No?
No.
What?
So leveret marriage
is the baby hair.
I think it's Levi, leveret.
Levirate.
Yeah. And it's got nothing to do with Levi. It's I think we mentioned it last episode. It's a Latin word, brother-in-law.
Yeah.
A levir is a brother-in-law. It's got nothing to do with Levi or Levi.
Okay, someone is going to have to tell me what the crazy Christian said, because I'm just browsing the comments. Incidentally, guys, if you see me looking at my phone, I'm looking at the comments. I'm not ignoring who's talking. But yeah, someone's going to have to tell me what he said.
All right, you just go to the last video in the comment section.
Oh yeah, that guy.
That guy.
Is he back?
Yeah. I don't know. I
didn't see anything.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, you were talking about last time. Yeah. That
guy.
Yeah, he was talking about your appearance. It was.
Of course he was.
Yeah.
I'm a woman. This is the only thing of any importance about me.
I mean, at the beginning, I always thought he was actually like listening to what we were saying, and
that's what I thought too.
Commenting what we were actually saying, and I was like, "This is interesting." And then I was like, "Okay," but there was that one comment. He said something to the other Christian who fucked off really early, and then like his comments at the end were like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, I don't know. He was creepy.
And then he got really pissed off, and Peter gave him a timeout or whatever.
Oh,
I actually gave him a complete out for that. That was not coming back.
So we're moving on to chapter 4 now.
No, Aaron.
Yes.
Of course. Thank you, Peter. I haven't even started it. Okay, so we'll start on verse 1. I must find a home for you. Hebrew for home is manoach. The word is derived from the root nun vav chet, which means to rest. This meaning is favored by Ibn Ezra, who writes, "A woman does not find rest until she marries," which I use that for a blessing to my sister.
Yes, you do.
Probably sarcastically, but nobody knew. So
yeah, I imagine the person who said that didn't intend.
But your sister married a woman, right?
Exactly.
So
yes. So
That
that was
actually
a,
sounds much more peaceful.
So subverts it a
Yes.
bit.
yeah. So Ibn Kaspi, Schipper, and Zakovitch render resting place. The word can also denote security, according to Nielsen and Eskenazi, which Naomi wishes for her daughter-in-law in Moab, as in 1:9. On verse 2, Nielsen comments, continuing her marriage plans, Naomi points to Boaz, who is their relative. If a young woman is to marry, it is the custom to approach a family member with a view to discussing possible candidates. From chapter 2, we know that Boaz is both a relative and Goel, a kinsman redeemer. But it is unclear whether Naomi imagines that Boaz is to be consulted on the matter, or if she has already chosen him as Ruth's future husband. The plan to get Ruth married naturally presupposes that Ruth has no brother-in-law with whom she can enter into a levirate marriage, and that she is free to marry whom she will.
Well, her brother-in-law also died, so yeah.
Yeah. On verse 3, put on perfume, in Hebrew, sacht. The word is derived from the root samech vav chaf, or samech yud chaf, to pour in anointing or anoint, according to BDB Dictionary. This meaning is attested in the Vulgate and Peshitta. Some specify that this refers to oil. Ibn Ezra, for example, writes, anoint yourself with oil that emits a pleasant odor. Ibn Kaspi writes that this refers to myrrh oil, and according to Eskenazi, one Septuagint manuscript reads, rub yourself with myrrh. She also writes that in the ancient Near East, people rubbed olive oil into their hair and skin to protect them from damage in the hot, dry, sunny climate. Men would also anoint their beards. Nielsen notes that from the Mesopotamian area, there is an account of how the goddess Inanna, at her mother's suggestion, washes and perfumes herself and dressed up to meet Dumuzi. Targum combines both traditions, anoint yourself with perfumes.
Yes, because remember, we absolutely do not anoint ourselves with wonderfully scented oils to seduce men. That is just reading way too much into the text, and how dare you?
Tomer, is there like a connection between Samach Yud Chof and Sin Yud Chof, as in Messiah, Mashiach anointing? Because it's very similar in meaning and sound, but they're two different letters.
It does, but like the letters, no, because you have in Mashiach you have Shin and Chet, not Samech and Chaf.
Oh, it's Chet, right?
Guess,
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but I guess
it just
but
sounds. And also, both of those sounds would have been very different back in the day.
Yeah, but I guess you have some like commentator who is proficient in Kabbalah who thinks that this refers to the Messiah or something.
No. I'm just saying, like, these verbs, are they connected? Because they both seem to mean anoint. They sound the same.
I mean, yes, you're right.
The modern Hebrew, I guess.
Yeah. Even Eskenazi notes that in the public life of the nation, priests and kings were anointed with olive oil when they took office, for which the Bible uses another verb, mem shin chet. Sorry.
Right. Okay.
One interesting aspect of like the superstition or like the background to whatever these anointing oils are maybe doing, something I read was that it seems like they thought that oils served as a medium between this world and like wherever God is, like the spiritual realm. And so that's why they were included in many of the rituals and stuff that took place with the priests and all that, because there's just something about oils that kind of bring these two realities together or connect them somehow. And so I don't know what you guys think about that, but
that's an interesting thought. The only way I know, like, oils are excellent carriers for scent in perfumes, for flavor in cooking. You know, if you are using spice, you need an oil to carry it and salt to enhance it, which, you know, if you're on a diet, you may end up being stingy with those things, but you need some, or you will not have any flavor. So it's, I don't know. I was kind of considering the connection between cooking and witchcraft recently. And yeah, I think that might actually have something to do with it, because the you know, women stirring cauldrons and brewing up magic potions and stuff. that's kind of just cooking and,
Yeah.
Making unguents and ointments. And, if you have a basic understanding of medicinal herbs in the area, that's fucking magic to men who don't know what you're doing.
And then I think too, animal sacrifices too, and their fat. There's just something about the pleasing aroma, something the oil, the fats are doing that are significant for them, and so.
Now on the same verse, go down to the threshing floor. In the Masoretic text, the word vayaradet, you go down, is in the Kirei, but the word vayaradeti, I go down, is in the Ketiv. Rashi comments, my merit will go down with you. Eskenazi notes that some scholars consider this to be an archaic second-person feminine form in the singular. Schipper, however, writes that it is difficult to determine if that is the case here, and that, quote, many other second feminine singular forms in Ruth do not reflect reconstructed Proto-Semitic morphology, end quote. He further writes, quote, since Naomi is the speaker, one could explain these verbs as distinguishing her speech pattern as unusual or old-fashioned rather than as reflecting genuine archaic forms.
Sort of like writing an accent in like Mark Twain did.
I guess. Now on verse 4, uncover his feet. In Hebrew, it's gilit margelotav. The word margelotav is found only in Ruth, verses 7, 8, and 14, and Daniel 10, 6. Some, like Targum, Peshitta, Ibn Ezra, and Ibn Kaspi, read the text plainly, that this refers to Boaz's feet. Other commentators take his feet to be a euphemism for the genitals, as seen in Isaiah 6:2 and 7:20. Nielsen, for instance, writes that Ruth, quote, uncovers her sexual organs and invites Boaz to cover her with the corner of his garment, end quote. Zakovitch writes that by saying the uncover his feet, the erotic tension increases, and because of the sexual connotations of the verbs to uncover, gala, and to lie, shachav, and Ruth's seductive appearance, quote unquote, it can be assumed that Naomi wished that Boaz had sex with Ruth on the same night. Eskenazi, however, writes that such interpretations are highly improbable, given the biblical narrative and the description of the section. She writes that the author or editor, quote, may have deliberately placed the term for legs in Naomi's mouth instead of the more familiar word regel, precisely to exclude a sexual connotation, calling the reader's attention to the ground around Boaz's feet, end quote. Others write that this refers to the place where his feet were. Thus, the Septuagint reads, uncover the place at his feet. Vulgate, left up the clothes wherewith he is uncovered towards his feet. Gersonides wrote that margelotav refers to the part of the bed which is at the end of the feet. Schipper notes that the PL verb forms of the root gimel lamed hey, to uncover, frequently refer to the uncovering of one's body. In most of these instances, the body that is uncovered is a female body. Thus, Naomi is probably instructing Ruth to undress and lie down at Boaz's feet, as Ruth does. Oh,
I was just going to say, well, the other cue is it when she says, "I'll do whatever you want." That's kind of a clue that it's sexual. I'm thinking.
Boaz.
Whatever it takes.
Teach thee, I am naked first. Wherefore needst thou more covering than a man?
When she says, I will do everything you tell me to know me. Not to Boaz, right?
I'll continue. Thus, Naomi is probably instructing Ruth to undress and lie down at Boaz's feet, as Ruth does in the following verses. However, he writes, quote, exactly what type of activity Naomi implies and Ruth carries out remains unclear, because in some of the references, uncovering the body is used with the various forms of the root shin chaf bet, to lie down, as a euphemism for sexual activity. Compare Leviticus 20:11, 18 and 20, and Deuteronomy 27:20. The fact that these activities may or may not happen in close proximity to Boaz's genitals only adds to their ambiguity. Moreover, other verbs that Naomi uses in this verse, know and enter, derive from roots that are often used as euphemisms for sexual intercourse, yada and bo, respectively.
Say no more.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
A wink is as good as a nod to a blind bat, eh? Sorry.
Oh, come on. Monty Python is classic.
I mean, I love Monty Python, so yeah. Okay, on verse 7, was in good spirits. In Hebrew, vayitav libo, literally, his heart became good. Likewise, Septuagint has, his heart was content, and Peshitta, his heart was glad. Zakovitch and Nielsen write that he was filled with joy from eating and drinking, and Schipper writes that this could refer to inebriation. But Eskenazi writes that the phrase can also indicate joy unrelated to the consumption of wine, as seen in Judges 18:20, 1 Kings 8:66, and Proverbs 15:15. Some rabbinic commentators like Ruth 5:15 and Rashi wrote that he was glad by his study of Torah. Because obviously, Vulgate has, he was merry. Targum reads, he blessed the name of the Lord who had accepted his prayers and removed the famine from the land of Israel.
Of course, what else could he be intoxicated by but joy at the Torah?
Yeah.
That's what religious commentate. Yeah.
On that same verse, Ruth approached quietly. In Hebrew, vatavo balat. Schipper notes that the word is derived from lot, secrecy or mystery, and conveys the sense of something done in private, as seen in 1 Samuel 18:22, or without another party's knowledge, as seen in Judges 4:21 and 1 Samuel 24:5. The reading of secrecy is favored by early translations, Gersonides, and modern commentators. Eskenazi notes that the word balat alludes to a story about David in 1 Samuel 24:5, when David cuts off the wing, kanaf, of Saul's garment, while the latter is covering his feet, i.e. relieving himself. David's action is modified by the adverb balat. She writes that in both accounts, an underdog acts with evident goodwill before initiating a negotiation with a powerful person, who then invokes God's blessing upon the first party. She also notes Linafeld's opinion that there is an allusion to Lot and his daughters in the word balat, which sounds like the word belot, against Lot, Genesis 19:9. And, quote, in both stories, a woman wants something from a man who has been drinking. After having conferred with another woman in her household, she violates convention by coming to lie down at night with him in such a way that he does not know it, and which later results in the birth of a boy.
And I'm seeing here in the SBL Study Bible here, so even about like spreading your cloak over someone. I know we were just chatting about that. If we go to, it looks like Ezekiel 16:8, there's a reference to this being like part of like marriage language. Though there's a little bit more, right? So even in Ezekiel 16:8, so later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. So like the language is supposed to be like, in this context at least, in the context of Ruth, seems to be declaring marriage. But there's also the implication, like I guess if we take this interpretation, it is more, there's some evidence there, I guess, to say that this is a good argument for Ruth uncovering herself, and then Boaz is like, oh, let me cover you, so kind of taking her to marriage. But the thing is, he doesn't actually do the whole marriage thing until later anyways. Like he hasn't actually like entered into at least the marriage covenant yet. That's later, and there's in the next chapter, and that's gonna have a weird tradition associated with that too. But we don't get that actual marriage until the next chapter.
Hey, but here's one thing though that I'm just thinking about visually, right? This woman is, as the text said, covered in oil, and now she's laying down on the threshing floor. That doesn't that kind of make you think that maybe she's now covered in grain all over the place? Like...
That's where the 5 measures came from.
I don't
Yeah,
think
there
this
you
is
go.
oil wrestling. WrestleMania oil wrestling. Yeah. Although well, you can't wake up the other men around. Presumably the other workers were somewhere nearby. I do love that he sends her away before anyone could see her, so she doesn't have to do the walk of shame. But he also sends her away with dinner, so that's always nice.
One thing I don't think we mentioned was why is he doing the threshing at night? I mean, the commentators say that this was during the time of the judges. It was like a time of anarchy, and so Boaz was scared people would steal from him, and that's why he did it at night.
I don't know if it says, does it say he did the threshing at night, or that he was doing the threshing over several days and thus slept out where the work was being done that night?
Yeah, it's not actually that obvious, but this is the way that they wanted to read into it, something like that.
It's definitely possible. Like you mentioned, threshing at night or threshing in a wine press. Gideon did that in Judges.
Yeah.
So there's definitely precedent.
He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight, is in verse 2. So
I think part of it also, at least it gives me that impression that it's sort of given circumstances where this isn't premeditated. Like Boaz, he just happened to fall asleep on this, heap of grain or whatever. And she just approached him. Like she's making all the moves and he's not doing anything.
It's obviously premeditated. Like, how else is she going to know? Oh yeah, go find him where he's going to be sleeping in the middle of the barley harvest. Yada yada yada. Do this, do that. Have a bath.
Maybe that's why they explained it as he would stay with the grain overnight to protect it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe to protect it. Yeah, that makes sense. Or just maybe that field wasn't particularly close to his house.
Now on verse 8, something startled the man. In Hebrew, Vayecherad ha'ish, and the man became terrified. It is not clear what made the man scared, or what made Boaz scared. Gelsonides wrote that Boaz sensed that somebody was close to him. Sfono proposed that he had a bad dream. Rashi proposed that Boaz sensed the presence of a demon. Likewise,
sucking the soul right out of him.
Well. You'll know. Listen. Likewise, Nielsen notes the opinion of Sasson that, quote, the background for a grown man waking up in fright in the middle of the night is to be found in the fear of the demon, Lilith, about whom it was said that at night she imposed herself in intercourse with sleeping men, thereby diminishing their potency. If Sasson is right, then Boaz is frightened that it is Lilith who is hunting him, end quote.
Not just diminishing their potency, but making them come in their sleep.
Yes. And then they woke up ready to go. Precious seed to make baby boys, which is the only thing that matters.
I mean, if you woke up and there was a strange person on you or next to you, and you couldn't tell who it was, you'd also be frightened.
Well, Kara proposed to transpose the text, so it'll first read Vayilpat and then Vayecherad, and so he turned himself about and was troubled. Or something like that. Vayilpat, I think, is a hapax.
I love how they need excuses for how someone would roll over in the night.
Yeah.
Are these people like completely steady state sleepers who never turn over in their bed?
There is a Jewish, not law, but kind of tradition where you should always go to sleep on your left side and wake up on the right side. And they never understood that. Like, how are you supposed to make yourself wake up the other way? It seems to work, but when you do it, but I'm like, how does it work? I have no idea. Go to sleep on one side and always wake up on the other. Okay. It's to do with digestion. You should go to sleep on your left side so that you digest your food better.
Okay, now on verse 9, spread the corner of your garment over me. In Hebrew, parasta knafecha al amatecha. Spread your kanaf over your servant. The word kanaf is generally understood to mean skirt, robe, or garment. Targum, followed by most traditional and modern commentators, view this as a marriage proposal. Schipper notes that the spreading of a man's skirt is in the singular serves as an idiom for conjugal activity, as seen in Ezekiel 16:8 or Deuteronomy 23:1, which is 22:30 in the Old Testament, 27:20, where uncovering a man's skirt refers to sleeping with his wife. Sfonu, however, interpreted spread your garment to mean to help and to advise. Eskenazi takes kanaf to mean wing. Thus, Ruth asks Boaz for protection or patronage, without spelling out how Boaz is to provide this support.
What about the term translated handmaid? Amatecha.
Amatecha? Yeah, I mean, it's usually taken to mean like a female servant or female slave. I think we've seen this term in Exodus 21, I think, where Amatecha
Yeah,
is
it's all
used.
over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon, and they do define this as concubine or slave. But is that really the case? Like,
I don't think so.
Like your servant, your maid servant.
Well, it's definitely someone that's like lesser in status.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, all through this, whenever you're asking someone for a favor and, you know, take the responsibility for my dead husband's land and give me a baby, but I, you know, all that inheritance is going to go over this complicated thing. It's more than just having sex. Is you know, a rather big ask. The language is, yeah, it's very self-depreciating, but at the same time, that seems very normative for that culture and time to be like, oh, I'm absolutely worthless for me, won't you please, you know, like it's just it seems to be a bit of a cultural the way that courtesies work there to just be like very self-appreciating, and then you know it reminds me a bit of like Chinese parents who will yell at their kids for accepting a compliment because you should never accept a compliment. That means you're arrogant. You have to like say something self-depreciating in response, and it's like a cultural, you know.
Well, Eskenazi writes, to call oneself amatecha was a woman's normal way of expressing proper deference to a social superior, used in the Bible especially in relation to a man to whom she wishes to ingratiate herself. Ingratiate.
Yeah.
Ingratiate.
What a funny way to put that.
Yeah, English. Like T is an S.
Yeah, also
very,
it's
very nice.
also it's
like a nation.
Mer, yeah.
Mer.
No,
not
T-I followed by other vowels is an S.
Yeah. Okay. On that same verse, guardian redeemer in Hebrew goel. Eskenazi comments, Hebrew goel, a redeemer, is a term that occurs 9 times in Ruth as a noun and another 12 times as a verb. Redemption then has a strong resonance for this book and is one of its key themes. In the Bible, a redeemer / goel is charged with protecting vulnerable relatives. As Shlomo Bahar notes, the protection a goel provides can take many forms, depending on circumstances. It can have a physical, economic, or spiritual dimensions. Biblical laws describe 3 specific responsibilities of a human redeemer. A. Settling blood vengeance, Numbers 35. B. Redeeming a relative from servitude, Leviticus 25, verses 35 to 43. And C. Buying back a poor relative's land that was sold, Leviticus 25, verses 25 to 34. It seems that any relative who can afford to is obliged to offer help in these cases. In the prophets and the Psalms, Goel most often refers to God metaphorically as the Redeemer of Israel, and sometimes of the just or of the poor in particular. Several of these meanings are at play in Ruth's request. She calls Boaz to his responsibility to protect a poor relative, and she also alludes to the opportunity for him to act as a redeemer in God's stead. But is she asking for something more specific? Although many ancient and modern interpreters think that she is proposing marriage, that conclusion is not warranted by what the Bible discloses about redeemers and by the details in the book of Ruth. At most, marriage might be hinted at at by the double meaning of spreading the kanaf or kenafaim in the same verse. On verse 10, this kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. What does this earlier kindness, Hebrew the first, refer to? Rashi, Ibn Kaspi, and Sfono comment that the first kindness was Ruth joining Naomi. This is favored by Zakovitch, Nielsen, Eskenazi, and Frymer-Kensky. Gersonides offered another interpretation that Ruth's first kindness was that she listened to Boaz and did not go to harvest in other fields. He, however, prefers Rashi's interpretation. Ibn Ezra writes that the first kindness refers to the kindness Ruth showed to her husband when he was alive. The last kindness is unclear. Kara wrote that her last kindness is described in the same verse, quote, that you have not turned to younger men, end quote, but instead gave her eyes to Boaz. While this is favored by Zakovitch, Eskenazi notes that other ancient and modern interpreters like Shmuel de Uzeda, Malbim, and Hubbard consider the second kindness, quote unquote, to pertain either to Naomi or to the deceased husband. According to the Targum, the first kindness was Ruth becoming a proselyte, and the latter, quote, that you, i.e., Ruth, have made yourself as a woman who waits for a little brother in law until the time that he has grown up.
I mean, I would have thought the first kindness was not abandoning Naomi and following her and taking care of her, because taking care of your mother-in-law in such dire straits when she has no one else is, I mean, obviously a very good thing to do, but also a lot of work. Yeah, I don't know. And yeah, okay, she didn't run after like Beefcake McGee. They're, it's your hot, ripped young 20-year-olds. They're a lovely bit of eye candy, but most of them are not exactly well established enough to take care of you when you have family to consider and you're in a rough spot and you're gleaning in the fields. You're in a rough spot. The woman's a bit more practical, so.
Now on verse 11, all the people of my town, in Hebrew, kol sha'ar ami, all the gate of my people. Schipper writes that gate functions as a metonym for the political body responsible for the legal or political affairs of the town. This view is found in the Targum, quote, all who sits at the gate of the great Sanhedrin of my people, end quote. Early translations understood this idiomatically. Septuagint reads, the whole clan of my people. Vulgate, all the people that dwell within the gates of my city. Peshitta reads, all the family of our people. And Kara renders, all those who come at the gates of my people. On that same verse, a woman of noble character, in Hebrew, Eshet Chayil. The term is found only here and in Proverbs 12:4 and 31:10. The term is used to describe, quote, a fine woman, end quote, according to Eskenazi, woman of worth, according to Schipper, a strong woman, according to Septuagint, a righteous woman, according to the Targum, etc. Nielsen writes that when applied to Ruth, it has the function of making her a suitable partner for Boaz, who correspondingly is described as a wealthy man, Gibor Chayil in 2:1. Zakovitch writes that the woman in Proverbs 31:10 forward is described as powerful and influential. This figure, he writes, is consistent with Ruth's character and with Boaz's words that express his willingness to do as she wishes. On verse 13, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. Hebrew Bible reads, Im yig'alech tov yig'al. Chazal in Ruth Rabbah 6:3 and Tanchuma Bahar 3 interpreted tov to be the redeemer's name, a reading which is rejected by Ibn Ezra and Ibn Kaspi. Schipper writes that tov can also be read as that is best. If so, quote, Boaz may imply his preference that another member of the clan serve as Ruth's redeemer. The narrator does not clarify the motivations for most of the characters' actions in the book. Whether one understands Boaz's sanguine attitude about Ruth marrying another man as reflecting his self-sacrifice on her behalf, or his hope that someone else will serve as her redeemer, depends on part on how one chooses to interpret his character.
it occurs to me also that if you have sex with a woman, that is in this culture much the same as marrying her unless she is married to someone else. So it's possible that Naomi, in sending Ruth to almost certainly seduce Boaz, is trying to sort of double down on legal obligations so that she can make sure they're both well taken care of. Because clearly he has the resources to do it. So
there is one aspect of this Redeemer Goel thing that in Christianity gets also interpreted in this text particularly, because in terms of as an allegory to the church, in the sense that in a similar way that Boaz is redeeming this woman that is destitute, like from the perspective of she has no inheritance, she's in a foreign land, she's got no money, she's poor, she's this very low person that gets then elevated or re-elevated or reinstated in this culture that she's a foreigner of. And that's sort of like the church, in the sense that Christ comes in and he redeems these pagans, these people that are like often described as prostitutes, like in the sense that they're worshiping other gods and they're idolaters, so they're dirty, and God redeems them through Christ and puts them in an elevated position now, and that's sort of like, and it's playing on the imagery of the bride and all that other stuff too.
Yeah, but it's not disturbing at all how Christianity is so obsessed with making sure that its adherents are always degrading themselves so that they can remember that they were maybe redeemed, but they are not actually deserving of it. So
yeah, remember where you came from.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's not manipulative at all.
No. Abusers never degrade their victims in order to keep them constantly groveling and in the relationship. What are you talking about?
Well, once we get to chapter 4, I'll note the Christians who think that this prefigures either the church or John the Baptist or whoever. Like,
I'm so glad you're here to bring us far more intelligent versions of what P-Town would have said.
Yeah, at least the sources are ancient. I'll grant that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now in verse 14, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. According to the Masoretic text, Boaz said this, but it is not told to whom. In several Septuagint manuscripts, Boaz speaks to Ruth. Vulgate has Boaz implicitly addressing Ruth, and in the Peshitta, Ruth speaks to Boaz. And I have a quote from Ruth Rabbah 7:1, quote, Rabbi Chunya and Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, throughout that night, Boaz was flat on his face and was saying, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that I did not touch her. Likewise, may it be your will that it is not become known that a woman came to the threshing floor, and the name of heaven will not be profaned because of me.
I must have missed something. I had to walk away for a moment. Where did He-Man come into this?
Oh my god! No, okay. That is so. What's his fucking name?
Yeah.
Ben Sira. That is so Ben Sira. Oh my fucking god.
So, okay. So the Waard, however, writes, all these different interpretations clearly show that the Masoretic text is the oldest attainable text, and that the utterance should most probably be understood as a monologue. He thought to himself, end quote. Zakovitch writes that the author shapes shared intentions between Boaz and Ruth. Each projected his own opinions towards his fellow, without them sharing their thoughts, her by the act and him by saying this to himself.
Well, okay. I hate to say it, but as I warned, I do indeed need to go. So I'm going to leave this in your capable hands. I love you all. I will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Hasta la bye-bye.
Hasta la pasta.
And but before you go, because one more Monty Python reference. She's gone already. Yep. Matt White says, Aaron, so we're saying this Ruth had huge tracts of land?
The biggest tracts of land. huge tracts of land.
I
Okay.
have disappeared. Nope, there I am.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Now on verse 15, 6 measures of barley. Hebrew is shesh seorim, literally 6 barleys. Since it is unlikely that Ruth had to use her shawl to carry 6 grains of barley, some suggested to read seorim as a type of measure, as seen in the early translations, Kara, Gersonides, with Targum, Titania, and Sforno specifying 6 se'as of barley. Rashi, however, writes that this refers to literal 6 barley corns, and it hinted that out of her will emerge a son who would be blessed with 6 blessings. Rabbi Yehuda, yeah.
It just reminds me of like when people read the word "but" in the sentence like wrong. So instead of being like, they'll be like, "But monkeys' butts." But monkeys. No, I read it wrong. But yeah, like when you have "but" in the middle of a sentence and then you use it as part of the noun before it.
Yeah.
So it's like the end of the first sentence is monkey, and then the second sentence begins with but you read it as monkey butt instead of monkey. But
yeah.
The way you said that was quite funny.
Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Simon in Ruth Rabbah 7:2 takes the 6 measures as symbolizing 6 great men who would descend from Ruth. David, Hezekiah, Josiah, Daniel, his 3 companions who are counted as 1, and the future messianic king. Don't you love it? I do. On that same verse, then he went back to town. Although the reading "he went back to town" vayavo ha'ir is attested in several empty Masoretic text manuscripts, like Leningrad, Aleppo, and Cambridge, Septuagint and Targum, and many other Masoretic text manuscripts, more than 40 according to the Waard, Vulgate, Peshitta, and several Old Greek manuscripts read, "She went back to town," vatavo ha'ir. Ruth Rabbah 7:3 reads, "This teaches that he was walking with her so that none of the young men would accost her." Eskenazi and Zakovitch prefer the feminine reading, but Nielsen and Schipper preserve the masculine reading of the Masoretic text. On verse 16, "How did it go, my daughter?" Oh, I thought somebody spoke. Hebrew Bible reads, "Who are you, my daughter? Mi at biti." This reading is preserved in the Peshitta, Septuagint, and Targum. Ibn Ezra writes that Naomi possibly did not see Ruth before Ruth entered the house, for Naomi opened the door for Ruth to enter, as was customary. He writes that scripture omits Ruth's response, "I am Ruth, your maidservant," which is found in the Peshitta. He notes the opinion of Ibn Janach that the word for who, me, is in place of the word for what, ma, and so mi at biti means what did you experience. Likewise, 2Q Ruth B and several Old Greek manuscripts and Vulgate read what, ma. According to Ruth Rabbah 7:4, Naomi asked, "What are you, single or a married woman?" To which Ruth replied, "Single." Schipper takes me in a genitival sense and thus reads, "Whose are you, my daughter?" And Nielsen preserves the MT, "Is that you, my daughter?" On verse 17, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying ... Verse 15 does not tell us what Boaz told to Ruth. Eskenazi notes some opinions regarding this. Quote, "Some scholars, like Fowler and Gunn, conclude that Ruth fabricates this statement to measure a self-centered Naomi. Others find another example of Ruth's generosity. Moshe Alshech suggests that Ruth adds these words to assure Naomi here that marriage with Boaz will not distance Ruth from Naomi, for Boaz cares about Naomi's welfare, hence the grain. Some approach the statement as reflecting a matter of narrative technique. Thus, Peter Coxon concludes that the writer is highlighting the key thematic issue of a journey from emptiness to fullness. Bush argues that Boaz had in fact said these words, but the narrator uses direct speech at this point, quote, "to communicate to us and to Naomi the seriousness of Boaz's intentions," end quote. Schipper writes that one could understand Ruth's supposed quotation of Boaz as her interpretation of what his gesture means, since the character's speech and actions do not necessarily provide ambiguous access to their intentions. And finally, on verse 18, Schipper comments, Naomi instructs her daughter, quote unquote, a term that can apply to an unmarried member of one's household, to stay, presumably with her, until the matter is finished. Within the patrilocal structure of the household model, a woman usually went to live with her husband's household upon marriage. Thus, to whom Ruth is married, if to anyone, remains unclear at this point. In fact, whether Ruth was previously married to Machlon or to Kilion is only clarified in 410. As Naomi implies, whatever happened on the threshing floor, the matter is not yet finished. What is the status of Ruth's relationship to Boaz? How will Boaz, whom Ruth and Naomi never have referred to by name in this conversation, resolve this matter? Who, if anyone, will serve as a kindred redeemer for Ruth and Naomi? Considering how profoundly the status quo has been disrupted, how far would a kindred redeemer be willing to go for it? How far would a kindred redeemer be willing to go for it to be restored? In a sense, Naomi's instructions set up the climax to the story in the final chapter. That's it for my commentary. And Aren is not here.
All right. So in that case, either I could read chapter 4, or we can hand it off to our good buddy. Oh, Aren is actually back.
Yeah, I'm here. I was just outside the room when you finished up. Okay, so we're ready to read 4 then?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer had mentioned. He had mentioned, came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders from the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling one piece of the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, or is that Mahlon? Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses." "May the Lord make this woman who is coming out to your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. You may have standing in Ephrathah."
Yep. Yes. Very good, Aren.
"And be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Oved. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Neshon, Neshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, and by the way, in this country we call that salmon. Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David.
So the important part here, or one of the important parts, I should say, is that that ending genealogy is a later addition. I did mention that last week, but a few things here to cover. So
this chapter is highly legalistic.
Yeah, not just legalistic. There's also a lot of the ethnic issues start coming out here as well. So
I'm a little confused at this part. How does this enable me to buy something?
Oh, well, you see, this specific practice of taking off the sandal in order to acquire things, right? This custom of giving the sandal to the one acquiring things. It was this is not the way it, like, the one other sandal practice was in Deuteronomy, I think. It's not quite the same. I think in that one the woman takes off her sandal and then she is then,
I think it's the levirate.
She takes off his sandal
in levirate marriage. So it was a practice, but it's not the same as, it's different.
Yeah,
it's a pretty different
Mm.
form of this. So I'll get to that in a second. One of the things I did want to mention was that there's just a textual variation in verse 5. So the Septuagint has, and Boaz said, during the day in which you acquire the field from the hands of Naomi, and along with it Ruth of the Moabites, wife of the man that died, and acquire her for yourself, it is necessary that you raise up the name of the man that died by his inheritance. I think the addition there, or in the Septuagint, it's from the hands of Naomi. Or sorry, wait, no, never mind. I remember there being a
actually the Septuagint
here.
According to
I remember reading in one of the commentators that 4:5 was different in the Septuagint than in the Hebrew.
Is it a Septuagint? Because according it Veme'et, right? Is that where the
I don't remember if it was Schipper or
the Hebrew in verse 9 says from the hand of Naomi.
Oh,
yeah, from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth. Me'et Ruth.
And from Ruth. Okay, I got you. And from Ruth. Okay. Yeah. So, sorry, the Septuagint is from the hands of Naomi and along with it Ruth. So not.
Is it the Septuagint? Because according to BHQ, it's different. There is et Ruth in the Old Latin and Peshitta, and Ruth quoque in the Vulgate.
Well, I definitely know that it's in the Septuagint because I translated the Septuagint, and
let me check this real quick.
So at least in the Septuagint, it's not that you are acquiring the field from both Naomi and Ruth. It's that you're getting it from Naomi, but also acquiring Ruth. Yeah, that was the difference there. Yeah,
Emendation yields. You must also require.
I mean, I'm telling you, this is definitely in the Septuagint. The part that I translated is definitely in the Septuagint.
Yeah.
I mean, my translation. My translation of the Septuagint has the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, the wife of the deceased.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe it's like
okay. Well, I'm telling you that looking at the Greek text.
But Vulgate has, when thou shalt buy the field of the woman's hand, thou must take also Ruth, the Moabite, who was the wife of the deceased.
I think he uses para. He uses para Ruth. So it'd be along with Ruth. Along with
para. Yeah, I mean,
along with
the Waard,
the field, or so, yeah, along with the field of Ruth.
The Waard writes, although Septuagint, through its rendering kai para, confirms the reading of Veme'et of the Masoretic text, it also confirms through its double translation kai auten, I think, the interpretation of the Vulgate.
Yeah, so and it, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you can see it kind of, you can see how it's changed over time. So it probably was the weird Hebrew one originally, where it's like and from her.
Yeah, the Waard takes it as the Waard writes that it seems therefore that the problems are largely interpretational.
Sure, yeah. See, yeah, if I knew Hebrew at all, I'd be able to analyze something there. But
let's not lose sight of the fact that these are all properties. Like this is all
yeah,
including Ruth and all that. That's
true. But anyway, he mentions he mentions the land because this kinsman is of course meant to redeem it. But it's weird that he doesn't mention Ruth until it's weird that Boaz doesn't mention Ruth until he says this kinsman says that he wants to redeem. He would have been okay with taking in an old woman like Naomi and her land, because at least according to his reasoning, it seems like the inheritance wouldn't be affected that way. But once Ruth is mentioned, the kinsman says, well, now I can't do it because now he might like have more kids or something. I don't know.
Well, it's very ambiguous.
It's not super clear. But
I'm guessing Boaz. I'm thinking Boaz wanted to like not trick him into saying it like that, but to kind of expose his true intention in front of the witnesses. Like, he's wanting to redeem it, but when I mentioned Ruth, he's like, oh no. Like if he had mentioned Ruth initially and he said no, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint the reason why he said no.
Oh yeah, maybe. Okay, I could see that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this chapter is very legalistic, and actually I've spoken with Simone about this, and she wrote that it made her. That means ignoring what the book clearly considers its climax, as it builds up to that point that the narrative is resolved by the resolution of the legal issue. Hence, me being convinced that it is a book about halakha, and one of the earliest ones, that kind of issue is lacking from basically all of the narrative in the Bible except from the Torah. And she also writes, it is very weird it is very weird in that it combines the laws of levirate marriage with the redemption of property, but I think that's part of the point. But the former is the means by which the latter occurs, which is necessary because women don't inherit property. But that makes the redemption of property weird because it should just pass to the Goel. The book appears dependent on a different kind of inheritance law than what is actually preserved in the Torah.
Right.
I personally think that it has something to do with the daughters of Zelophehad in Numbers 27:9, but also the revision of this in Numbers 36 verses 1 through 9.
I think one other potential clue. So like, the thing about the sandal practice, right? How weird it is, right? Because it is quite different than we've seen. It is this combination of legal practices. So it is also potentially a later edition. Because the practice,
the explanation, right? The bit that says in those times that's what they did.
In Ruth 4:7
only. Yeah.
I think. Yeah, this is the custom of former times. Yeah, that.
But the next bit would have been not like, and he took off his sandal. That would have been the initial. That would have been the original.
Oh, sure, yeah. But the because it is for me, I could see why this is kind of part of the reason I also talked to someone about this, interestingly. This is part of the reason why I was like, well, what if it's like an exilic date, right? Because you're talking about like a time where like you don't necessarily have like your own set of laws that you are to follow, and you might either be mixing mixing your own legal practices, or you might easily develop traditions in smaller communities that could lead to something like this. It is speculative, but that was kind of like to me a hint, because it is really weird. because the practice of like levirate marriage through giving the sandal, of course, in Deuteronomy 25 is not the same as it is here. So Nielsen,
yeah, that's when he refuses to do, when the brother-in-law refuses to do a levirate marriage, then the wife will the widow will take off his shoe and spit on the ground or whatever. Like, it seems to be more of a it's not really a legalistic, like, oh, I'm not bound to you or anything. It seems almost more like a, you know, not a punishment, but like a degradement.
Protest.
Yeah,
totally. But the
maybe
thing
it
is,
was
even stuff
legalistic.
like that can be, it depending on. I mean, this is where like getting into like old laws are it's kind of weird, because we're talking about our own modern conception of what it means to be law versus theirs. Because like laws came from customs, so like it could easily be seen as like something like that could be seen as like a signifier for like the breaking of like this rule or this custom that might be held to the same status as something legal, even if it's not written that way. Because like that's, I don't know, there's this weird maybe not weird, it's just a different way of looking at law and legal practices, because we can't be clouded by the modern concept of these things. Like, we need to be able to kind of understand it from their perspective. But there was an interesting point from Nielsen. So precisely who gives the sandal to whom is not clear from the narrative. In Psalm 60:10, Yahweh casts his shoe upon Edom as a sign that he has claim to the land, which may perhaps be used as evidence that property rights could be expressed in some form of gesture involving the owner's footwear. So it might be, of course, you know, as you noted, like there might be an act of humiliation here, but it's not quite as much of like a punishment, right? That like Onan got, but it would still be pretty bad. And that was the guy who pulled out, and then God's killed him right there.
So at some point, we're going to have a transaction here, and then somebody says, "I have a new tradition. Let's just shake hands."
Yeah, it seems a lot easier that way. But also, yeah, there's a lot of. Sorry, go ahead.
I think, isn't shaking hands like come from like from a tradition of showing a bare hand to show that you don't have a weapon or something, rather than being like a legalistic thing to signify the end of a deal? I don't know.
I did not. If that is the case, I didn't know that.
Maybe that's why you shake hands when you meet someone.
Maybe. So, but then to me, the really interesting stuff comes in with like this genealogy stuff. To me, that's super interesting, because I feel like, you know, that is everything that the story is leading up to. And like there is some weirdly pseudo messianic language in here as well. I mean, it's stuff that's been used for like Messiah figures.
Oh,
time,
messianic, you say?
I
You know who else is a Messiah?
Cyrus. So this has been used as evidence that this is like a later text, to kind of fit in with, like, you know, kind of the Maccabean period or something. But the thing is, I don't really see that as necessary, because there are other like near messianic. There's like, I'll put into the category for now of messianic language. It did exist from the exilic period, so like the and even, and you know, just directly like or early Persian period too, because we have something like the servant songs, which also include similar language like this. But like you're talking about like this great name in Israel, and he's going to be known both in Israel and in Judah. You know, he's going to both so bestow a name in Bethlehem in verse 11, and his name would be renowned in Israel in verse 14. So there are quite a few things that could be used in a messianic context. Now, of course, I rarely hear this being used by Christians, but the point is, like, you're talking about like you're getting to David. That's the big point, that you are trying to explain David's Moabite past, which we will get into. Not even that far from now.
Well, and it also like you see how Ruth works more like as a prequel rather than a prologue,
right?
Because you reach David and like, who's David?
Right. Yeah. So it is all leading up to is explaining this Moabite line of David, which to them would have been, fairly important, especially in a period where they were like, oh, hey, mixed marriages are bad, kind of thing. So explaining how one of your cultural heroes can be of that origin, but also how the practice is bad is something that they had to wrestle with. So I think there's a lot of very, very cool stuff in this chapter for that.
Isn't it also the point that perhaps David's heritage came to almost be eradicated had it not been for the preservation of this line, that eventually that's the whole point why there's a genealogy at the end of the book?
Well, I mean, that might be true, but like, when it comes to David's actual lineage, it's really hard to say. Obviously they kept these traditions, but then after the Assyrian invasion, it's kind of hard to say how well that kept up. They kept the tradition, but it's hard to say how far the actual line continued to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there seems to be like an interesting trope about heroes or David specifically coming from a line that is unusual, because you've got the story of Ruth, you've got the story of Tamar and Judah, which is actually mentioned, and there's also like the fact that David is the youngest son of Jesse, Yishai. So there's quite a few different tropes that are like, oh, the youngest son is better. The this sort of weird marriage with Tamar, and over here with Ruth. I don't know if maybe these were used against like the Davidic line, and then maybe they were retconned into being something good pro for him.
That is also a possibility. How initially, was it? I forget if it was it. I think it was Nielsen that pointed this out. I have to check my notes, because I didn't actually include this. But yeah, how this initially would have been like a pro Samuel thing, and then the story got converted and or not converted. It would have been. Oh man, I don't remember the phrasing. I'd have to go back and check.
I have to appreciate how you went out on a limb to suggest that at the point where Boaz has this kid and they name it Oved, and then right away it says, and then Oved became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. You go out on a limb to say that might have been added later.
Well, no, the mostly the part about now these are the descendants of Perez. Yeah,
that where it starts higher up in the tree. Yeah, the begats.
Although I did find a comment, I think by Zakovitch, who writes that this is original, but I'll get to that, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things going.
Well, the thing is that the David genealogy would be not genealogy, but the David connection would be maintained even without it. So like,
yeah,
because David's mentioned, but then that's true. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are like, it seems to be like either propaganda against, or then that was kept, or because you've got like the whole story of Lot.
Yeah, so like
where Moab comes from.
Like this could have been like written as like, oh, look how awful David is because he's part Moabite, as like a pro Samuel thing. But in either case, and because we do have some risque things in here, so that might be another potential jab. So I have seen that suggested.
I mean, it does seem to me, it seems like the original text here is pretty old, because we have this, like you say, the legalistic thing, but there's also the bit with to me it seems the fact that you've got like I don't know what you'd call it, like an added addition that's explaining, oh, this is what they used to do back in the day to explain the next verse with the sandal. And, you know, that addition would have maybe that addition is exilic or post-exilic. That would mean that the original is probably like pre-exilic. Does that make sense? Like it seems to be harkening back to a time when the later authors didn't actually know, like.
Well, the thing is,
you know, we don't really do that anymore, but this is what they used to do, and that's why the story mentions it.
Yeah,
So
I know what you mean.
There's an older bit and a newer bit.
But I feel like that would be kind of anachronistic, right? Because like if they are trying to archaize a story about the David lineage, then like no matter what time period, like, you know, around the time of the exile, they could still just add, oh, this is what they used to do back in the day. Like, so it is kind of an anachronistic, I'd say.
Oh, you're saying like they would have written this. The story could have been written much later, and then they wanted to add something to make it look like it's old. So
or that
you're saying that it wasn't necessarily a later edition, but it was just.
Yeah, either way, like both those are possible. But like to me, that doesn't necessitate that it's pre-exilic text.
Okay.
Okay, before I'll start my commentary, I should note that many Christian commentators have seen like all this chapter just basically prefiguring either Jesus or John or whoever you want to. For example, Isidore of Seville, he writes that the story of Boaz and Ruth prefigures the coming of John the Baptist, which anticipates the union of Christ and his chaste bride, the church, who is called from among the Gentiles.
Oh my God, fucking shut up.
What's it called? Ecclesiasta? Ecclesiaste? Something like that? The feminine personification of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a thing that they had,
Yeah, and synagogue.
Yeah, and also Theodoret of Cyrus, he said that the manner in which Boaz proceeds with the marriage clearly testifies about his chastity, and according to Opus Imperfectum, and was an act of piety.
He declares marriage without her even being there. Let's just point that out.
Okay, they seem to plan it in advance.
They do, yes, but still.
Like he's like, okay, let's I'm gonna go. Don't worry about it. There's this one guy we need to figure out how to get rid of him. I'll deal with it.
Well, have they not already made a commitment in that direction?
They did.
Right?
But the thing is, he didn't even get like the ability to sign off on that until later. So he was like making a promise that he honestly didn't know that he could keep in terms of the narrative.
Okay, so I'll start my commentary. First, on verse 1, my friend, in Hebrew, ploni almoni. The exact meaning of this term is unclear. This term appears in 1 Samuel 21:3 and 2 Kings 6:8 in reference to a certain place. Traditional commentators derive ploni from the root pei lamet aleph, to be wondrous or hidden, and generally derive the word almoni from aleph lamet mem, although others derive it from ayin lamet mem, like Gersonides and Titrani. Rabbi Yehoshua in Ruth Rabbah 7:7 taught that the Redeemer's name was Ploni Almoni, although some rabbis in Ruth Rabbah 6:3 wrote that his name was Tov based on 3:13, a reading which Ibn Ezra rejects, as I've noted. We can assume that Boaz knew who the Redeemer was, and so it remains a mystery as to why the narrator avoided mentioning his name. Eskenazi notes some of the opinions, quote, some rabbinic sages, as well as modern scholars, for example Hubbard, suggest that not naming implies measure for measure justice. The one who refuses to preserve the name of a kin deserves to have his own name vanish. Others argue that the narrator may wish to protect him from the embarrassment resulting from his inability or unwillingness to undertake responsibility for Ruth and Naomi. Campbell, who reviews the various proposed explanations, rightly concludes that none is satisfactory, end quote. Schipper writes that for the purposes of the narrative, the use of this idiom, quote, helps maintain the focus on this character's role as a potential kindred redeemer, similar to the way the rhyming names of Naomi's sons maintains the focus of their roles, end quote. Nielsen writes that the author's anonymization of the man is, quote, an expression of indirect condemnation of him as a man who refuses to safeguard the good name of the family for posterity. He deserves to remain nameless, end quote.
Yeah, the expression Ploni Almoni is used in later Jewish texts to like literally mean like anonymous or
Ploni
so and so. Like you can be like, you can say a story and you'll be like, okay, so Rav Ploni and Rav Almoni, where we're talking to each other, and it's just like they're like placeholder names almost.
Yeah, that's basically the Hebrew for anonymous. You can also have alum shem, which means nameless or something like that, without the name. But so on verse 2, 10 elders, Eskenazi comments, in the pre-monarchic period when the book of Ruth is set, namely the time of the chieftains in 1:1, the elders constituted a town's formal authoritative body. The precise qualifications for the position of elder in ancient Israel remains a matter of conjecture. Neely Fox notes that the term applies to sub-tribal units as well as tribal and clan leaders. The term indicates either longevity or high status within the group. An adult man, she writes, quote, could qualify as an elder if he belonged to a family recognized by the group as prominent, end quote. Certain biblical texts like Judges 11 and Ezra 10:14 suggest that assemblies of elders were usually summoned ad hoc as the need arose to adjudicate cases. In summoning elders to function as witnesses, Boaz here sets the stage for a legal transaction where their presence legitimizes their proceedings. In an ironic twist, perhaps not accidental, elders here legitimate precisely the kind of marriage that Ezra 10 delegitimizes. The number 10 implies that this is an official legal assembly of elders. Rabbinic texts conclude from the present case that a quorum is required for reciting marriage benedictions, according to Ruth Rabbah 7:8. In later Jewish tradition, the number 10 constitutes the minimum number required to make up a community. Rabbinic Judaism establishes 10 adults as a minimum, a minyan, required for certain acts of public worship, such as mourners Kaddish and reading the Torah publicly, Talmud Megillah 23b.
Yeah, there is also a thing about like when 10 Jewish men gather together, the like the Lord is like comes with between them or whatever. There's also like 3 men as well or something.
Yeah. Okay. On verse 3, Nielsen comments, the field belongs to Elimelech, who is described by Boaz as a relative, and the kinsman redeemer is told that Naomi wishes to sell it. We do not know from where Boaz has this information, since he and Naomi have never met in the course of events. But apart from this, the situation is simple enough. The many deliberations by scholars as to whether the field has been leased out while Elimelech and Naomi were in Moab, or whether as a widow Naomi is allowed to own the field in question and put it up for sale, are quite superfluous. Nothing in the text suggests that those present have wondered at the situation or questioned it. Naomi is a childless widow who, for financial reasons, must sell the family property. Such a sale is a matter for the other members of the family, since the closest relative ought to come forward as kinsman redeemer and redeem the field. The duty to act as kinsman redeemer is prescribed in Leviticus 25, verses 24 to 34 and 47 through 55, and is also known from a similar case where the prophet Jeremiah buys his cousin's field in Jeremiah 32:7 forward. On verse 4, Zakovitch comments, Boaz does not hide his rights from the Redeemer and allows him to decide if he wants to fulfill the redemption commandment. His words are listed from the lightest to the heaviest. He opens with the redemption of the field, and only after revealing the first agreement, he moves to Ruth's redemption. But from his words, we see his inclination. He isn't satisfied with the command to acquire, kana, but it adds and immediately reveals the 2 options, similar to what he did on the threshing floor in front of Ruth and with the same order, 3:13. In chapter 3, both options talked about Ruth's redemption. Here, they are still about the field's redemption, but a reader who acknowledges 3:13 already remembers the question regarding Ruth's redemption and expects that it will come back to the surface. In his words to Ruth, Boaz painted the possibility of her redemption to the close Redeemer as a good choice, tov yik'al. In his words to the Redeemer, he is no longer capable of repeating this estimation. When the moment of truth approaches, Boaz can no longer lie. He must present the first option, since the close Redeemer has the birthright, Leviticus 25:25 and Jeremiah 32:7-9. but this is nothing more than a manifestation of an obligation. In the second option, Boaz lengthens his wording, unlike his words to Ruth. There he said, quote, if he does not want to act as a redeemer for you, end quote, and here, quote, if you will not redeem, end quote. He avoids telling the redeemer if you won't act as a redeemer, because that will put him in a negative light if he refuses to fulfill his right. On verse 5, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. Eskenazi comments, Boaz introduces a complication, the purpose of which is clear to the reader, to dissuade the other man from becoming the Goel. Boaz has expanded the ownership of the field to include Ruth, the real subject of his actions. Like Naomi's entitlement to the land, so too Ruth's rights to the land are obscure in the text. The present situation is all the more ambiguous given Ruth's Moabite status. Presumably, as the widow of Machlon, she too shares in the inheritance now under Naomi's jurisdiction. At least this is how Boaz presents the case. On that same verse, the wife of the dead man, Schipper comments, in verse 5, Boaz refers to Ruth with a technical term, the wife of the dead man, in Hebrew, Eshet Hamet. In Deuteronomy 25:5, the wife of a dead man seems to be entitled to security within the clan through the birth of a son. In verse 10, Boaz declares that he acquires what belonged not only to Elimelech, but also to both of his sons, Kilion and Machlon. The inclusion of both sons probably reflects the fact that multiple generations were dwelling together as an extended family, and that their inherited land had not been divided among the sons before they died in Moab. If Naomi and Ruth are the surviving members of this extended family, then Ruth is entitled to this type of security within the clan structure, which Boaz seems to acknowledge when he refers to her as the wife of a dead man and the wife of Machlon. On verse 6, I might endanger my own estate. In Hebrew, pen ashchit et nachalati. Zakovitch writes that this motive is obscure. He notes that Josephus, in Antiquities 5334, wrote that he already had a wife and children. Similarly, Emmanuel the Roman writes, it could be that he had adult sons, and he was afraid to invite a foreign woman into his house, lest she'll argue with them, or that he had another wife, and he did not want the two to be rivals. Zakovitch further writes, it could be that the Redeemer does not wish to lend his money in another's territory, to support the widow of another and to grow a child who will be called after that other, and so ensuring his memory. But it seems that the correct reasoning is hinted in the Midrash, in Ruth Rabbah 7:10. Quote, he said, quote, the first ones died only because they took them. Heaven forbid that I take her. I do not want to taint my children. I do not want to mix dross with my children, end quote. And Rashi, quote, to give my offspring a stigma, as is stated, neither an Ammonite nor a Moabite in Deuteronomy 23:4, end quote. The assumption that his reluctance to marry a Moabite wife made him change his mind goes well with Ruth's nickname by Boaz, the Moabite, in verse 5. The Redeemer is ashamed to say that this is the reason for his refusal, and therefore covered it up with words that can be interpreted in many ways. He cannot reveal his motives since they are also valid for Boaz, and he already declared that he shall redeem Ruth if the Redeemer will refuse. The words of the Redeemer are reminiscent of Onan's avoidance from taking Tamar, the wife of his brother, Genesis 38:9.
I have questions.
Sure.
Yeah, the notion that when Naomi sells the land, then automatically that sells, this is her daughter-in-law, into slavery. Am I understanding this right? I mean,
it's possibly like a condition of the sale to the Redeemer is that he should also.
So we're talking about the traditional concept of slavery, right?
Or the traditional concept of marriage. Not so different, I guess.
Yeah, right. Not that different. But yeah, I would say that it seems like
if there are women living on your land and you buy the land, you own the women, but they're not your slaves, they're your sex slaves, they're your wives.
And let's not forget that Ruth was a foreigner. So she would have different rights. I would say
Yeah,
less rights.
That's true, yeah.
I don't think it's saying that automatically because you're buying land, you get the women associated with it. It's more like you're buying the land from Naomi, and Naomi has stipulated that you should also marry her daughter-in-law.
Yeah, it's like part of the.
Oh, it's part of the. It's
redemption.
an individual contract. It's not always the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what's.
Thank you.
Mm.
I'm
Okay,
good.
I'll
We can continue.
Yeah, sure. On verse 7, one party took off his sandal and gave it to another. Eskenazi comments, oral cultures rely on witnesses and symbolic gestures to ratify legal agreements. Although such
what I want
know,
with your shoe. Sorry.
Listen, Aaron, you might learn something. Okay. Although such rituals are not always described in preserved writings, since writing displaced them, we can assume that these practices continued, especially in agrarian communities, long after writing was adopted for formal legal matters. A sandal, in particular, lends itself easily to be used as such a symbol. Ibn Ezra observes more than a millennium later that a sandal is a common personal item that can be removed without leaving a person naked. Nonetheless, there exists no reliable extra-biblical evidence for sandals being used in legal transactions in the ancient world. Yeah. Now on verse 9, Nielsen comments, Boaz's subsequent speech confirms that the agreement has been attested by eyewitnesses, and that he has not only bought the field, but also everything else that belonged to Elimelech and his two sons, Kilion and Machlon. These two are named in reverse order from 1-2, making it impossible to decide from the order which of them is the elder. In the light of the well-known theme from the patriarchal narratives of the younger brother being preferred to the elder, it is nevertheless reasonable to assume that the author mentions Machlon last in chapter 4 because he wishes to present him as the blessed younger brother who, despite his premature death, survives through his son Oved. Correspondingly, Ruth, who is presumably the younger of the two sisters-in-law, is the one preferred and the one whose family lives on.
I wonder, was Moab the younger son, the younger one, like where there was Ammon and Moab were the two brothers?
Did it say which one was younger and older? The two sons were Mahlon and Kilion. Yeah,
no,
I don't
it
see anything
doesn't
about
say that. No, but I think he referred to Ammon and Moab.
Yeah, I was asking I was wondering if there was a thing about Moab being slightly better than Ammon because the Moab was the younger one. Also, there's a thing about how the younger daughter was more modest than the older daughter, right? In the story with Lot's two daughters, there seems to be a tradition that like the older daughter was the one that kind of instigated it, and the language used seems more explicit, and with the younger daughter it seems she was more modest about it or something. Yeah.
According to Genesis 19:37-38, the older daughter of Lot bared Moab, and the younger daughter bared Ben Ami, who is
okay. So I got them the other way around actually. Okay, so actually it was the older daughter had the Moabites. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, now on verse 10, Schipper comments, in verse 10, Boaz explains that the reason for the establishment of the dead man's name upon his inheritance is to ensure that his name, quote, may not be cut off from among his kin or the assembly of his place, end quote. As with other vocabulary in Ruth, Boaz may use the verb cut off from the root chaf resh taf with a technical sense similar to its use in priestly literature, including holiness legislation. In priestly literature, chaf resh taf, karat, can refer to the destruction of a person's lineage or a person's inability to join her or his ancestors in death. As Milgram notes, these two uses are not mutually exclusive. Boaz's use could imply both senses of the verb, as Machlon's lineage faces extinction, and he presumably was not buried in his ancestral tomb because he died in Moab. In 1 verses 16-18, Ruth showed concern over her burial place to ensure that she is not separated from Naomi, either in life or in death. Now Boaz may show concern over Machlon's threatened lineage and his separation from his ancestors. On verse 11, like Rachel and Leah, Eskenazi comments, these two sisters whom Jacob married are, together with their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah, the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel, as in Genesis 29 to 30. References to the matriarchs in the Bible outside of Genesis are quite rare. They appear in only 3 other places. 1 Samuel 10:2 mentions Rachel's tomb. Isaiah 51 verses 1 through 2 recalls Sarah as a source of hope for the post-exilic community. And Jeremiah 31 verses 15 through 20 announces that God responds to Rachel's bitter weeping over her children with a promise of hope and restoration. Rachel is listed first because Jacob is first betrothed to her, even though the marriage with Leah is consummated first. Her priority is indicated, for example, in Genesis 31:4. Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field. She is also Jacob's favorite wife, the one he loves in Genesis 29 verse 18 through 20, and repeatedly recalls 48:7. The reference to Rachel and Leah honors Ruth by aligning her with the ancient matriarchs. Pesikta de Rav Kahana 16:1 emphasizes this alignment by having Boaz assure Ruth, who had called herself foreigner, of her place with the matriarchs. But the blessing goes even further. As Traut Fisher writes, these wishes not only make the Moabite woman Ruth, a foreign woman, equal to the female ancestors of Israel, they also provide Ruth with a genealogy based on women.
They don't really know how. They didn't really know how to do polyamory back then, did they? I mean,
they only did polygamy, where one man.
You've got a collection of wives, but you only love one of them. You can only love one of them, and because of things being the way they are culturally, they can't also help you out by loving each other.
Yeah, I mean that's why Judaism basically abolishes that in the medieval period. But yeah,
I was wondering about this verse, if it's supposed to, if they made up a new blessing, and they making her like Rachel and Leah, blah blah blah, and then this was kind of adopted later as a sort of, oh, here's a nice verse that we can relate it to marriage, or if this was maybe a more standard marriage blessing. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up a house of Israel. I wonder if that was already, maybe by then when this was written, a standard wedding blessing, and then it was added to the story to further show that this is has ancient origins or something like that. So I'm almost sure that exact verse, or that part of the verse, I should say, is used in modern Jewish weddings. Something similar, anyway. Be like what Rachel and Leah.
Before I continue, I should note some of the Christians. So Isidore of Seville and Chrysostom wrote that the marriage of Ruth and Boaz has a profound symbolic meaning. It prefigures salvation of all peoples in Christ and His church.
I want to empathize with you, Tomer, because I think this is true empathy here, where all these people are reading into the Hebrew Bible what is not there.
Yes. and like in Christian scholars will be the first ones to criticize eisegesis versus exegesis, where you draw meaning from the text, but rather you're bringing in your own meaning to it, which is what they're doing all the time with the Old Testament, with the Hebrew Bible. But it's just such a hypocrisy, Christian theology, in my opinion.
I got into it once upon a time when I was telling somebody how they tell me that God is pure spirit, right? And so I mention all of the times that God shows or presents His physical form or does physical things, including where He shows Himself to the 70 elders and whatever. And the Christian then argued that, well, that's God's physical form, Jesus. I'm like, No, in Exodus, they're not talking about Jesus. In the Hebrew, but those people didn't believe in Jesus. They're not talking about Jesus, but I can't get Christians to understand that.
There's so much stuff about God's body. Like, he's described in very anthropomorphic terms a lot. Like
you can bring the Odes of Solomon, please.
I wasn't going to, but now I kind of want to.
I felt like you would.
No, yeah, there's a lot describing his hands, his feet. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff describing his body. There's not only the book by Francesca Stavrakopoulou, God in Anatomy, but there's also Mark S. Smith's book, Where the Gods Are, which has a pretty lengthy chapter on the physical body of God. But yeah, no, it's not Jesus.
Well, Theodoret of Cyrus, he writes, the elders confirmed the marriage with a blessing, saying, the Lord made this woman, etc. Moreover, so that she may be an example of virtue in Ephrathah, they predicted the salvific birth through which Bethlehem was made famous among all people. Moving on.
Yes, exactly. I really do. I sincerely feel empathy for you, Tomer.
Why not? I enjoy it. I don't know about you. Okay, on verse 12, Perez whom Tamar bore to Judah. Zakovitch quotes from Emmanuel the Roman, quote, Tamar was a stranger and a foreigner to the nation of Israel, and for her piety she wished to raise an offspring from Judah. This is similar to what Ruth did when she left her people and her gods and followed the holy nation, end quote. Schipper writes that, like Ruth, Tamar would be considered the wife of a dead man within the clan structure. The name Tamar also has assonance with the word substitution, tmura. Oh, I see a comment. You want to read it, Oren?
Sure. Let me see here. We have Martin Urbani offers €5.99 and says, I just wanted to say hello. I'm still at Deuteronomy.
Good luck. Okay. On verse 13, the Lord enabled her to conceive. Hebrew Bible reads, and Yahweh gave her pregnancy. Emmanuel the Roman, quoted by Zakovitch, notes that the usual continuation of and he came to her is and she became pregnant and bore a son, as in Genesis 16:4, 38 verses 2, 3, and 18. The mention that God gave Ruth pregnancy might indicate that Ruth was barren and that, quote, God rewarded her well for her piety and her pleasant characteristics, end quote. Zakovitch writes that the assumption that Ruth was barren makes sense, given that she was married to Machlon for 10 years and never bore a child, 1:4. Eskenazi writes that this divine action, quote, highlights the book's distinctive theology, end quote, where Yahweh is intervening in human affairs only here. Schipper notes that the word for pregnancy, herayon, is, quote, a rare nominal form of the root hey resh hey, end quote, and rhymes with the names of Naomi's sons, Machlon and Kidyon. He writes that this may express divinely granted conception. And Nielsen comments that the child should be a gift from Yahweh is the logical result of a continuity maintained throughout the book, whereby both Yahweh in 1:6 and Boaz and Ruth in 2:18 and 3:15 appear as givers of food. The newborn child must also be seen as the fulfillment of Naomi's desire for her daughters-in-law in 1 verses 8 through 9, and Boaz's wish for Ruth in 2:12. Now Yahweh recompenses Ruth in full for her faithfulness. On verse 14, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. Nielsen comments, the woman's reaction to the birth of a son is closely related to the central statements in chapters 2 and 3, in 2:12 and 3:10. Yahweh receives the praise he deserves in recognition of his beneficence in granting the well-wishers their prayer for Ruth. At first glance, it seems surprising that they congratulate not Ruth, but Naomi, who through the newborn baby has acquired a kinsman redeemer. But by allowing the women to address Naomi, the author can yet again underline the importance of the family line and Ruth's loyalty to her husband's family. The word kinsman redeemer denotes in the context someone who can provide for Naomi in her old age and is thus used in its broadest sense. As Boaz became Ruth's redeemer, so does Naomi now gain her redeemer. Now on verse 15, he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Zakovitch writes that while renewing life in Hebrew meshiv nefesh is used to describe, means bringer of life in Job 33:30, that while renewing life, I blanked out. Zakovitch writes that while renewing life, meshiv nefesh means bringer of life in Job 33:30. In Lamentations 1:11, the term lehashiv nefesh is used to keep a hungry person alive by giving him food. The verb chaf lamed, to sustain, has the basic meaning of providing food, as seen in 2 Samuel 19:33 and 1 Kings 18 verses 4 and 13, but can also mean to carry or contain, as seen in 1 Kings 8:27 and Malachi 3:2. Thus, Emmanuel the Roman writes, the child will carry and suffer your old age, meaning that he'll hold your hands during your elderly days, end quote. Eskenazi writes, quote, in thus characterizing Ruth's child as a source of both economic and emotional sustenance, the women place the child in a larger context of symbolic and cultural meanings, redefining thereby the nature of family, end quote. On that same verse, who is better to you than 7 sons? According to Ruth Rabbah 7:16, this refers either to the 7 patrilineal heads, found in 1 Chronicles 2:15, or to the 7 generations from Perez to Boaz in verses 18 through 21. Schipper notes that the numbers 7 and 10 are used idiomatically in hyperbolic comparisons, in which one party is contrasted positively to other parties, as in 1 Samuel 1:8, Proverbs 26:16, and Ecclesiastes 7:19. Zakovitch writes that 7 denotes many, as seen in the Targum, which reads many sons. Eskenazi writes that 7 sons is proverbial and elsewhere understood as, quote, the perfect example of a blessed family, end quote, as in Job 1:2 and 42:13. On verse 16, took the child in her arms, in Hebrew, vateshitehu becheka, and she held him in her bosom, as seen in Peshita, Targum, followed by KJV, JPS, Eskenazi, and Schipper. Zakovitch writes that Naomi is rewarded with a sort of late renewed motherhood. He notes that some viewed this action and the declaration in verse 17, a son is born to Naomi, as a declaration of adoption. But he writes that there is no need to assume it here, and that this subject is never discussed in biblical law. Eskenazi notes that while Sasson points out to a Hittite practice of placing the child on the knees as acknowledgement of adoption, it does not conform to the present action. Instead, Sasson suggested, quote, vestiges of mythical motifs associated with a goddess, end quote.
Or she's a grandmother. I don't know. that one to me just doesn't seem like the biggest theme to look into, the biggest thing to be looking into, because you could say that there was, she lost her kids, but her kids were already adults, so obviously it sucks, but I really feel like this is just a grandmother being a grandmother.
Yeah, but Schipper writes that it probably does not suggest that Naomi breastfed the infant.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now on that same verse, cared for him. In Hebrew, it's omenet, a term translated to nurse by early translations, caregiver by Schipper, or foster mother by Eskenazi. Zakovitch writes that omenet designates a person who takes care of the child, as in 2 Samuel 4:4 and Isaiah 49:23, and the one who educates the child in 2 Kings 10 verses 1 and 5. Schipper notes that texts use masculine participle forms of the root aleph mem nun to refer to male caregivers or guardians, as seen in Numbers 11:12 and Esther 2:7. Nielsen renders, she cared for him like a mother. On verse 17, the woman living there, etc., named him. Zakovitch notes that usually the father, and in some cases the mother, gives the child the name. Here, the women neighbors, hashchenot, give him a name. Eskenazi writes that naming, quote, rarely functions as an act of authority over a person or a person's destiny. Most often, it discloses the expectations of the one who bestows the name, end quote. Schipper writes that the use of the idiom proclaim a name, shem le'emo, is used to describe the woman's announcement of Oved, rather than the proclamation of either Boaz or the dead man's name. By doing so, he writes, the narrator positions Naomi as the senior member of the household that becomes the lineage of David, who is mentioned for the first time in the book.
Yeah, I would definitely say that this is like because the whole the community of women is naming this kid instead of any of the parents. It definitely seems like there's already, like, not just from the genealogy, but there's already like this within this narrative itself, this kind of feeling of this guy is going to be awesome, like this guy's going to mean something to all of us. And Alter writes here that the name Oved, which occurs nowhere else, means worshiper and is probably a shortened form of Obadiah, worshiper or servant of the Lord. At least that is what Alter writes.
Now, on that same verse, Naomi has a son. In Hebrew, Yelad ben le Naomi. A child was born to Naomi. Ibn Ezra connects this with Exodus 2:10, and he, i.e. Moses, became her, i.e. Pharaoh's daughter, son. I.e., quote, the woman who takes care of the child in his infancy is referred to as the child's mother, end quote, according to Chaim Strickman. Likewise, Eskenazi writes that the women are not negating Ruth's role as mother, but rather are extending the child's connection to Naomi. Schipper writes that the root Yud Lamed Daled in the Kal form indicates to give birth, whereas the PL form indicates to deliver, as seen in Genesis 35:17, 38:28, and Exodus 1 verses 15 to 21. Thus, the Pu'al form would indicate to be delivered rather than to be born. On that same verse, Obed, the word Obed is derived from the root Aleph Bet Dalet, to work or to serve. Thus, Kara takes the name to mean he shall serve Naomi and sustain her old age. Ibn Kaspi argued that the child's true name was Machlon, to fulfill Deuteronomy 25:6. He writes that his true name is not mentioned because of its bad connotation, quote unquote, and not to disrupt the joy. Nielsen writes that the etymology of Obed's name is not given, possibly because the author wishes primarily to present the boy as both Naomi's son and the ancestor of David. Now, on verses 18 through 22, most commentators see this genealogy as a later addition. Schipper writes that the repetitions with verse 17 suggest that this is an addition, and that the genealogy shares material with the genealogies in Genesis 46:12 and 1 Chronicles 2 verses 5, 9 through 12, and 15, which possibly reflect common source material. Nielsen writes, an important argument in favor of the genealogy's secondary character is that its content does not correspond to what one would expect from the story. According to this, we would expect to see Machlon's genealogy, since the purpose of the marriage was to restore his name. Instead, we get Boaz's genealogy, and even in the form of his forefather Perez's Toldot. The fact that the newborn Obed is known as Naomi's son in the story naturally does not make the link between the genealogy and the story any the less problematic. Most scholars, therefore, accept one or other variation of the thesis that a later redactor has added verses 18 through 22 in order to elaborate the family relationships. The ultimate consequence of this thesis can be found in Eisfeld's claim that originally Ruth had no connection whatsoever with David's family, but due to the mention of Perez in 4:12 and the name Bethlehem, it became at some point connected with the family of David. End quote. Some, however, disagree with this view. For example, Zakovitch writes that the repetition between verses 17 and 22 is deliberate. Quote, since the author reaches David, he again reveals to the reader the godly plan that was fulfilled by David's birth. The house of David begins with Perez, son of Judah, a character not unfamiliar to the book. The association between the book's narrative with that of the birth of Perez in Genesis 38 indicate that there is no coincidence coincidence with the generations gap, 10 generations that pass from Perez to David, as the number of generations from Adam to Noah and from Noah to Abraham. The guiding hand is apparent from the division of the 10 generations to 2 groups of 5. 5 generations until the Exodus, and 5 generations from the occupation of the land to the kingdom's establishment. It might seem that in Perez's birth, which opens the list, we may find a wrongdoing, as so in Oved, the son of Ruth the Moabite. But this wrongdoing is only apparent, since both Tamar's act and Ruth's act are portrayed positively, and as evidence for that, the descendant of both, David, is the father of the chosen dynasty by God to rule Israel. The list at the end of the book therefore compares Ruth with a shade of Torah, quote-unquote, of religious history, which is determined from above, and indicates that God's way is not like that of humans, end quote. Eskenazi writes that while it is possible that the genealogy was appended to Ruth by a later hand, the book, quote, was composed to provide this genealogy and family history for David, possibly spurred by some challenges to his legitimacy, or conversely, by a cultural tendency to elaborate on the ancestry of national heroes, end quote.
Yeah, if I had to guess, this section would probably have entered the text around the same time as the genealogies in Genesis from like the separate source that Tomer mentioned, from what we would call like a book of genealogies. So that would just be my guess as to when
I just think it would. I keep thinking back to like when my parents got married, and the tiny little announcement of my birth, around 1962, that gave birth to my name, who would become father of this other name, who would become father of this other name, and to see that reported in 1962 would be amusing to me.
You're right. That would be amusing.
Now, my final comment on this chapter and this book, 20 to 21, Salma and Salmon. Although this reading is preserved in several, although this reading is preserved in several Masoretic text manuscripts like Leningrad and Aleppo and Targum, most other translations and multiple medieval Hebrew manuscripts have Salma in verse 21. Zakovitch writes that this represents 2 traditions regarding the name, and the copyists of the scroll preserved both traditions. That's it for my commentary.
I think we have a comment as well.
Yeah.
We have one more. This is from Matt White, who says, Homer, Lawrence, the name is spelled with a C-E at the end.
Yeah, it's okay.
Matt White.
His name is already wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Tomer, Lawrence, was there a tradition in that culture of adoption becoming the legal rather than birth parent of the child?
Kind of. It's certainly not in the same way that there is now, but a lot of the time was reserved, like this culture of adoption was reserved for like teachers. Like if you were going to take someone,
because I got the impression from an earlier comment that if you sit a child on your knee, you have adopted it.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
hey,
you do have the story of Esther where it says that like Mordecai kind of adopted his niece, but that's a relative, so it might be a different sort of system.
Yeah, it would.
I think if there's anything else.
Hey, I wanted to bring up the fact that if you compare this bit of genealogy of David with Matthew gets it right 100%. It's as if Matthew had access to Ruth and just took those names there and put them in his text. But if you look at Luke chapter 3, Luke's genealogy, there are some differences. For example, instead of salmon, yeah,
Salmon.
There's Salah in Luke.
Yeah.
And then if you look up further up, it mentions the father of Aminadab being the son of Admin, the son of Arni, and then the son of Hezron and Perez. So it looks like it includes some variations, or there's a difference there. Something's going on between those 2 genealogies. So
yeah, it's almost like they had access to the earlier books but didn't read them.
Well, the thing is, some of these might be like some regional spelling differences, but like in other cases, it looks
Especially with written in
like
Greek.
they're just Yeah. So it'd just be like a different transliteration of the name, or in some of these cases, it looks like it's literally just a manuscript issue.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't Luke and Matthew's genealogies actually go different ways
Yeah,
to get to the same place? So, like they actually end up with completely different lineages.
Yeah, they're doing two different lines, I think. Yeah, if I remember.
I mean, one's gonna go back farther all the way to Adam. The other one's
Yeah, but it's still. I think it's still I think between Solomon and whatever. It's like it goes a different line, kind of.
Yeah, I think there was a different line. Yeah,
like different sons of Solomon, something like that. I don't remember exactly. And it's like I don't think we have attestations to like the people in between, like between Jesus or any of those names after like a certain point. They only exist, I think, in the New Testament. So to me, it seems that they both don't really know how Jesus is connected to the line, and they both just say, oh, he's the son of this, son of that, who came from this line of the royal family. And then the other one's like, no, he came from this line of the royal family.
I'm not sure how Jesus is connected to the line either, but I've seen him on the line a couple of times. He was even on an episode with me once upon a time. I met a guy once upon a time whose name was Light. His last name was Light, L-I-G-H-T. And I don't know if it's his legal first name, but people had a tendency to call him Bud. His name, because we're in Texas, his name was Bud Light. And while we're making fun of that, he said, "Yeah, well, I'll give you one more. I can trace my family back to the Bible." And I'm like, my first thought was, this was many years ago. I remember my first thought being, "That's not possible." He goes, "Yeah, sure. Just right in the beginning, it says, 'Let there be light.'"
I mean, a lot of Jewish rabbis through the ages have claimed a lineage to a known person in the Talmud.
We got another comment.
In the Talmud was a known person.
We got another comment from Anton Gomez. Says this might be a bit off topic, but I wanted to ask the panel, what do they think about Joseph of Arimathea? Some people say he's entirely fictional. Some to do with the etymology of the name. I think you might be referring to something that I read from Robert Price, which I actually thought this was interesting, coming from Price, where he reads Joseph Bar Matthias and takes that he was drawing a comparison between Joseph Bar Matthias, which would be help me out, Lawrence, with Josephus.
Oh, Josephus.
Josephus's Hebrew name, Joseph Bar Matthias, so that he was saying that Josephus was Joseph of Arimathea. And the amusing parallel that he drew there was he reads this little bit of this passage by Josephus, and that one bit really does sound like you're reading Luke, but from the other perspective, where when Luke is describing Joseph of Arimathea, it sounds like when you're reading Josephus that it's the same scene.
Well, Luke
from the opposite end.
Luke probably did use Josephus as a source, but I haven't looked into the suggestion that Joseph of Arimathea was Josephus. I haven't really seen that.
Isn't it where there is no actual Arimathea?
Well, yeah, there's also it's very speculative there. We have like no other records of it. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it too deeply. But I am pretty sure that I think most critical scholars don't accept the historicity of a Joseph of Arimathea. but I'm not. I haven't looked into it too deeply, so I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Do we have any more commentary on this, on Ruth?
Well, I do have, but that would be for the ending. If just just saying that we'll get to Samuel next week. Another book. So I'll end this with two commentaries by Christians. First by Ephraim, who writes, Ruth's love for God, exhibited in her boldness and humility, is rewarded with the privilege of bearing Christ. And Theophylact of Ohrid writes that the union of Boaz, the son of Abraham, with Ruth, a foreigner, prefigures the marriage of the Son of God to the Gentile-born church. Goodbye, everybody.
Wow, that's actually atrocious. All right. Also, make sure you join the Discord and make sure you catch the Wednesday Apocryphal podcast that we do every single Wednesday. So we're gonna. I'm not sure what we're actually covering next. We're finishing the infancy gospel of James next week. So
I would love to watch that.
Should be fun.
Wait,
I'd love to see you in any chat, Arn.
Who was the last guy you quoted?
You might have to remind me because I get distracted, but I would like to see that.
It'll be fun.
What was it?
Isaac? Tell me, what was the last guy you quoted?
Theophylact of Ohrid.
So he's saying that Boaz marrying a foreigner is similar to Jesus marrying the church.
I can quote
the
it
Gentiles.
I can quote it again. And Boaz begat Oved of Ruth. Ruth was a foreigner, but nevertheless she was married to Boaz. So too, the church is from among the Gentiles. For like Ruth, these Gentiles had been foreigners and outside the covenants. Yet they forsook their people, their idols, and their father, the devil. And so Ruth was wed to Boaz of the seed of Abraham. So too was the church taken as bride by the Son of God.
But you could say the same thing about Samson and Delilah. You know, like not every time the son of Abraham marries a foreigner, it's a good thing. Like
Isaac, are you trying to bring reason into this? This is the house of God.
That's right.
It's like such a stupid quote. Whatever the word is. Preach.
All right. Thank you all for that. See you next week. We will begin. Samuel, did you say? Yes?
Arn, I have a quick question. Should I make sure that I'm available tomorrow for an impromptu live stream?
Oh, you know what? For David C. Pack and his promised return of Jesus.
I mean, if Jesus is coming back, shouldn't we cover that live?
Yeah.
That'd be a good way to get views, covering Jesus' return live.
Yes.
Yeah, because David C. Pack, the guy that did the irrefutable proof of God.
Oh my God, I hate that guy.
Who was absolutely wrong about absolutely everything, as he is wont to be, who believes that he is depicted, not just prophesied, but described in his past life in the Bible. I forget what character he imagines.
I'm sorry,
he is.
What? He believes that a past life of his is in the Bible?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God, this. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna send that info to my creationist friend and see what he thinks.
One of his past Gilgals was a fly that came in and whatever what Eusebius saw him in his book and went.
No, he's a named character. I can't, but he's not one of the like top 25.
He wasn't physically
names.
inside a Bible. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's some other character later in the New Testament. Like I wish I could remember off the top of my head who he thinks he is, but he thinks he is this person, and he's an insidious cult leader. And I'm going to be delighted at this. Yeah, we should probably plan something. At least have drinks ready for when Jesus don't show up again.
You know that character in the New Testament, one of the neighbors of Jesus, Bob.
Bob, yeah, I should be wearing my Bob shirt because I do have one.
Yeah,
Church of Bob.
Anton Gomez just offered to be a correspondent in Mexico just in case he lands in the wrong spot.
Yep.
Brian.
Outstanding. Yeah, we will communicate an email and maybe do that. When we find out the exact time that Jesus won't be there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Wait, does he?
All right. Thank you much, everyone.
Does he think he's Elijah?
That might have been it, but I can't remember. I would have to look it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Currently looking into this.
Either case, he looks like a nut job.
He definitely doesn't look like an Elijah, that's for sure.
He's definitely
Elijah was way cooler than that guy.
Yeah, he's playing with the calendars. It's just like every other one of these people that are predicting.
Also, Elijah is, he's still around. Like, it's not like he could be reborn as someone. Everyone knows Elijah is like still alive, kind of.
Yeah,
he comes to visit our houses every year on Passover.
Next year.
Does he have a red
fill up a cup
suit
of wine
and long
for him,
beard?
and then my dad shakes the table.
Next year in Jerusalem, right?
All right. Gotta go. See y'all next
everybody.
week.